The Essential Education projector range from Hitachi sponsors ICT programs.
We sort of pass each other in the corridor and exchange odd comments, and then we go to football on Saturday and talk about music.
Yeah. There are occasional chats in the pub as well.
There are.
Yeah.
At Springwood School, the music department has been combining the traditional with the modern to great effect. Here, technology is being integrated with classical instrumentation to challenge pupil and teacher perceptions about what can be achieved with music in the classroom.
I think that the computer is a whatever you want to make it in terms of music. It can be an entire pop band, it can be an entire symphony orchestra if you want it to be. And like any musical instrument, it's quite easy to make bad music on it. It requires a bit more skill and a bit more application to make good music on it.
I think Peter and I have initially the same background, in that we were both classically trained. He has had the experience in pop music. I've continued to develop my expertise and understanding of classical music.
When I first came to Springwood, it was when we were first introducing music technology, and in my first year I worked very, very closely with all the music staff, spending a lot of time training them how to use the technology. And I think there was a genuine fear, and all of a sudden you're bringing a new technology in which is forcing them to look at how they teach in a completely different way.
For schools that have been working with music in a more traditional way, to start moving into music technology can be quite formidable. And so those teachers have to look at ways in which they can sort of make some progression, some pathway for them that's going to work and is going to be safe.
Once they got over their initial fears, they've embraced that technology absolutely fully. Rob has certainly latched onto the technology and understands it, very, very well indeed. We actually think in very similar ways about music generally. And even though we come from quite different backgrounds, the way in which we both perceive teaching music are very, very similar. So actually getting the job here was sort of ideal for me, because it meant I could fit into to the philosophy that Rob has on teaching and feel very much at home with it.
If we just put this guitar bit over there, to put the end on it, that should be all right.
I think I can bring all sorts of interesting things from outside into music teaching, not least of which my knowledge of the pop industry, because I think one of the ways in which the music curriculum can develop is by using much more rock and pop music within school lessons, because that's the sort of music which pupils interact with day in, day out.
There's one particular interesting case of two pupils in Year 9 who are working on a project, and one of them is basically a rock-based musician, and the other is more classically based, a violinist. And this particular piece of work, which is superb, is a result of the rock musician putting in the drum track and the bass track, and the violinist putting in the melody and the harmony.
It suddenly opens doors for them, and they can sort of realise that music isn't necessarily all about constructing very complicated things. It's using simple ideas effectively. So you can write a tune with just 2 or 3 notes. You come back next week and maybe add some drums to it, maybe add a bit of a bass line to it, so you can gradually add up simple ideas to create pieces of music which sound something that the pupils just wouldn't have ever dreamt of they could have done. And technology allows you to do that. If you start getting too much theory in the way, it can sometimes get in the way of basic creativity. And once you get to a certain level of the creativity, and if you're still interested, then you can start learning about the theory.
In a typical classroom where you've now got a whiteboard, it just opens up so many possibilities for music because of the visual dimension, which is such an important part of the way young people learn. The visual dimension is sort of fundamental. And not just the ability to project the software application onto a screen, but to be able to interact with that screen.
Most of you have got the chords in some way, shape or form. A lot of you have got the bass, most of you have got the drums in, okay? When I'm teaching in one of the computer rooms using Cubase, the use of interactive whiteboards begins to be really, really important. Because apart from anything else, Cubase is very, very visual.
Put it in record and then see if I can write a really simple tune.
You can actually record something in live as they're watching it, play it back to them, and all the time they can see the screen and they can see the differences, the differences that's happening to the screen as you're actually creating a piece of music. Then they can go back to their individual computers and they will have that image in front of them of what they should be doing, and then they can get on. At that point, they can then interact with Cubase.
Play what you just did. Oh.
Our role as teachers is, I suppose, initially to stimulate them, to give them ideas around which to compose, to give them parameters that they must stay within. They know what they want, they can hear the sounds in their heads. We have to enable them to get it into the machines and out of the machines as music.
The next stage in a lesson like that would be that they go and they then set out to try and work to the targets we've set for that lesson. It may be to put a chord sequence together, it may be to add a drum track to that sequence, it may be to put a bass line, it may be to write a tune. What I tend to do is to try to get them to work in as simple a method as possible, so that those people that are less confident have got confidence that they know that they're only using a limited number of notes to achieve, and those people that are capable will explore for themselves, and they'll discover that they can do extra things.
What music technology does at a basic level, it allows for all the children in a class to engage in a productive, worthwhile way with starting to make music. The challenge from that point on for music departments is to look at ways they can use technology, and maybe it's to do with increasing the range of software they provide, so that those pupils who have been hooked can continue to make music which they find stimulating, challenging and worthwhile.
These are pieces of work which aren't finished. The first exhibit from the far corner.
And then at the end of the lesson, what we try to do is then play some examples that the students have done, so that they can see that, yeah, they're doing wonderful things. And I don't just choose those musicians that have got grade 6 flute. Yeah, I will also choose those people that come in at the beginning of the year going, I'm not a musician, so I can't find my way around a keyboard.
Just load that up. Short and sweet.
Pupils find it so much more powerful when it's their peers who are actually doing the things, rather than the teacher demonstrating everything. So that when they go back to their consoles, they know that they can do it because they've seen their friends up there in the front manipulating the sounds on the software.
When children are working on the computers, they usually work in pairs, and there is a lot of communication and negotiation between the two of them, and they do tend to play to their own individual strengths within the partnership.
They have to develop the power of negotiation. Artistic negotiation is not always an easy thing, but they have to work together and they have to work out how they're going to work in a team. I
think probably the temptation is, if you've got the money and you've got the space, the ideal world is perceived as one in which every child has a computer. The problem with that is then the children are working in isolation. If they've got one computer per child and the headphones go on, they're then working in their own sealed little world. So there is some merit in having two work into a computer, because then at least you get some collaboration, sparking off of ideas and discussion.
It's interesting the way that the partnerships work. Sometimes one pupil will operate the music keyboard and the other pupil will operate the mouse and the QWERTY keyboard. So one does all the musical inputs, but not necessarily all the musical thinking.
When we first started using Sibelius, it was a bit weird because we weren't sort of sure what we were doing, because we'd just been said, oh look, here's Sibelius, you'll probably find it easier. And although we've been shown basically how to use it, there were still things that we wanted to do that we didn't really know how to do.
I like that bit, that staccato bit. Yeah, because it's the same here and here.
Oh, right, I see.
Because you and Alex play the same. It's good to hear what it's going to sound like as you're putting it in, where if you use pen and paper, you can't actually hear.
Yeah.
There is constant dialogue between the pupils. Obviously, at some point, the teacher will go in and have his or her input as well.
You see how, like, the bottom one's got staccato dot. The teachers probably see me about once a week and listen to my piece and just say, look, this is going well and this isn't going so well. But if you've got a problem, you just like put your hand up and they'll come to you and like show you how to like sort it out.
What children gain from working with computers and working with software is an immediate response to what they imagine, to what they hear in their heads. The software will allow them to realise that without a great deal of technological skill.
You've got this thing in your head and you've got to get it onto the computer to give it to other people so they can hear what you've got in your head, and you've got to sort of try and work it all out yourself, like some things like changes in speed or tempo that you want to implement into the piece.
On Sibelius, everything's in time, everything's like perfect, all the notes are right, dynamics are okay, and then you get it into the quartet out in the open, and it's a completely different sound to what it has on the computer.
The first sort of like change between computer and actual instruments is really weird because you're so used to hearing your piece on the computer and like everything's exact, and as soon as you put different instruments in and different people, and it just sounds so weird. And it takes you a little while to get used to it.
You do have to have a mixture of live playing and computers, because the computers and the technology are there for you to compose your piece on, and then you've got the instruments to play the piece on, and playing it live gives it a good vibe and a good feel because you can put your dynamics in properly, everything can be worked to the standard you want it to be.
Okay guys, let's try this through, shall we? After 4, 2, 3, 4.
Taking my piece from the computer and playing it live gives a feeling of satisfaction because I'm proud of what I can do, proud of the piece that I've written, and it's just a good feeling that you can change around your own piece as you're playing it. It's a nice thing to do.
What Hayley's just done is that she's produced this piece on the computer using the computer sounds, which are not the best in the world. She then brings it to the group, she listens to it, played by the group, she becomes aware of the problems of the different instruments balancing against each other. You've got the quiet flute and the loud saxophone, and then she can go back to the computer, refine it, bring it back to the group until she's produced something like we just heard, which she's very pleased with and satisfied with.
I think that learning music in sort of this way has just given me the opportunity to adapt my ideas and adapt my playing to sort of the standard, to be able to work my pieces how I want them to go.
Adding technology has unquestionably added enthusiasm for the subject because it makes it more accessible. Without any question, if we had more resources and more time available, we would have more people coming forward to want to do things. Those that really understand how music works can absolutely fly using this technology and can take themselves to quite astronomical places. And whereas the plodders, the ones that regard themselves as non-musicians, can still achieve, but in smaller steps, and that sort of differentiation comes quite naturally.
As Pete says, they can start to really fly with their imaginations, and it becomes something that helps them to realise their ideas rather than something that gets in the way.
Essential education projectors from Hitachi sponsor ICT programs.